This is Sleep Whisper. I will gently guide you into sleep by telling boring stories in a calm, monotone voice. I wish you a good night and deep, restful dreams. Please follow the channel for more.
The night arrived without intention. No sound announced it. No moment marked its beginning. The world simply became quieter. Aelion was already awake. He always was. He did not wake up because sleep did not belong to him. He did not rest because rest was unnecessary. He stood where the ground felt firm and unchanged. The surface beneath him had not moved in a long time. It had no reason to. Aelion looked ahead. There was nothing demanding attention. The sky remained still. Stars stayed where they were expected to be. Nothing fell. Nothing shifted. This was acceptable. He began to walk. Not toward something. Not away from anything. His movement did not create sound. It did not disturb the air. It only allowed time to continue passing slowly. Each step felt identical to the one before it. There was no difference worth noting. Aelion preferred it that way. Somewhere far away, a thought was repeating itself inside a human mind. The thought was not important. It was not urgent. It simply refused to leave. Aelion sensed this repetition but did not react. Repetition was natural. It required no correction. He continued walking. The ground remained level. The temperature did not change. The night stayed consistent. Minutes passed without significance. Hours followed without effort. Nothing needed to happen. And so, nothing did, the night remained consistent. This was important, though no one noticed. Consistency allowed the world to relax. It removed the need for attention. Aelion continued forward. The path beneath him did not curve. It did not rise. It did not fall. It existed only as much as necessary. He had walked this same stretch before. Or something similar to it. The difference was not worth remembering. Aelion slowed his pace. Not because he was tired. Not because he had arrived. Slowing down was simply another way of moving. The air felt unchanged. Cool, but not cold. Still, but not heavy. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a body shifted slightly beneath a blanket. A shoulder relaxed. A breath deepened. These small adjustments mattered more than grand events. Aelion understood this. He paused again. Pauses were never interruptions. They were part of the movement. The ground beneath him held its shape. No cracks formed. No pressure remained. Time passed carefully. It did not rush. It did not hesitate. Aelion looked to his left. Nothing required description. To his right, the same absence of urgency remained. This balance was ideal. In earlier ages, if such a term could be used, others like Aelion existed. They did not meet. They did not gather. They simply performed similar tasks in separate quiet spaces. Most of them were forgotten. Aelion did not mind. Being remembered would have complicated things. He resumed walking. The repetition of steps formed a pattern. The pattern formed familiarity. Familiarity created calm. Somewhere, a thought finally loosened its grip. It did not disappear. It merely softened. Aelion felt the shift but did not acknowledge it. Acknowledgement was unnecessary. The night continued. Stars remained in place. No clouds gathered with intention. Everything stayed incomplete. And that was enough. The night remained unchanged for a long time, long enough that the idea of change no longer seemed necessary. Aelion moved through the same quiet landscape, his presence leaving no mark behind him. The ground did not respond to his steps, and the air did not resist his movement. Everything allowed him to pass without comment, as if the world itself had agreed that nothing new needed to occur. Time continued in a steady, unremarkable manner, not measured by clocks or signals, but by the steady rhythm of breath that existed somewhere far away, inside someone who had nearly forgotten they were awake. Aelion did not count his steps. Counting suggested progress, and progress suggested an end. Neither of those ideas applied here. Instead, he allowed each moment to resemble the one before it. The sky above him maintained its familiar darkness, not deepening, not lightening, simply remaining as it was. Stars held their positions without drifting, and the space between them stayed wide and empty. This emptiness was not lacking, it was complete in its simplicity. As he walked, the path subtly repeated itself. Stones appeared similar to stones he had already passed. The texture of the ground felt familiar, though familiarity itself was not important. Aelion's awareness extended outward without focusing on anything specific. He noticed without examining. He observed without evaluating. This way of moving through the night required no effort, and effort, after all, was something meant for other kinds of beings. Somewhere, a distant mind shifted again. Thoughts slowed, not because they had resolved themselves, but because they had grown tired of repeating. This softening did not announce itself. It happened quietly, the way sleep often begins. Aelion sensed the change the way one senses a temperature difference that is barely there. He did not turn toward it. He did not need to. His role was not to intervene, only to remain present while things gradually settled into their natural stillness. The night continued to stretch, wide and uninterrupted. There were no signs marking its passage, no events demanding recognition. Aelion paused once more, standing without tension, without anticipation. Pauses like this were indistinguishable from movement. They served the same purpose. They allowed the world to remain balanced, suspended between intention and rest. Nothing asked for his attention, and so his attention rested everywhere equally. The silence deepened, though it did not become heavier. It stayed gentle, consistent, and open, leaving room for sleep to arrive whenever it chose. Aelion remained where he was for a time that could not be defined, and then, without any clear reason, he began to move again, continuing along a path that had no destination and required no memory. As the night extended further, the sense of time became less defined. Moments no longer followed one another in a clear sequence. Instead, they seemed to rest beside each other, indistinguishable and calm. Aelion continued moving through this softened stretch of existence, his presence blending into the stillness rather than standing apart from it. The landscape did not offer variation, and Aelion did not seek it. Uniformity allowed the mind to release its need to observe closely, and that release was essential. The ground beneath him felt the same as it had before, neither warmer nor cooler, neither rough nor smooth enough to deserve notice. Each step repeated the previous one with careful sameness. There was no urgency in his movement and no intention guiding it. He moved because remaining still and moving forward had begun to feel identical. The night did not react. It accepted this quiet progression without response. Somewhere distant, breathing slowed. The rhythm became deeper, more even, no longer interrupted by small adjustments or restless shifts. Thoughts that had once circled gently began to lose their edges. They did not disappear, but they no longer demanded attention. Aelion sensed this soft change without acknowledging it directly. Recognition was unnecessary. His role was passive, steady, and constant, like the background hum of silence itself. The sky remained dark, though the darkness had grown familiar enough to feel neutral. Stars neither brightened nor faded. They remained present without significance, marking no patterns and suggesting no direction. Aelion passed beneath them without looking upward for long. Looking implied curiosity, and curiosity led to engagement. Engagement was not required here. He paused again, standing in a space where nothing distinguished itself from anything else. This pause extended naturally, filling time without effort. The silence did not deepen, it simply continued, unbroken and smooth. In this space, awareness drifted without anchoring to any single thought or sensation. The world felt stable, unchanging, and unconcerned with outcome. Eventually, movement resumed, not because something had changed, but because change was unnecessary for motion to continue. Aelion walked on, maintaining the same pace, the same presence, the same quiet influence. The night did not resist. It did not assist. It simply remained, allowing sleep to arrive wherever it was invited. Without announcement or conclusion, the night no longer felt like something that was passing. It felt settled, as though it had reached a state where movement and stillness no longer needed to be distinguished. Aelion continued forward through this calm expanse, not watching where he stepped, not avoiding anything in particular. There was nothing to avoid. The ground remained consistent, and the space around him carried no expectation. Everything existed without urgency, and that absence of demand made the quiet easier to remain within. His awareness stayed broad and unfocused. Sounds did not gather, and silence did not deepen. Both remained evenly spread, filling the space without drawing attention. Aelion's movement became so regular that it blended into the background of the night itself. If someone had been watching, which no one was, it would have been difficult to say whether he was walking or standing still. The difference had lost its importance. Far away, consciousness drifted gently. Thoughts that once held shape now softened into vague impressions. They were present but indistinct, like reflections in dark water. Breathing settled into a slow, reliable pattern. Each breath followed the last without interruption, without effort. The body no longer waited for sleep. It simply allowed it. Aelion paused again, though the pause felt no different from movement. Time filled itself quietly, without reference points. Nothing marked how long he remained there. Nothing suggested when he should continue. The night accepted this suspension without change, holding everything in a steady balance that required no attention. The sky remained unchanged. Darkness neither lifted nor deepened. Stars continued to exist without meaning, their arrangement offering no message and no direction. Aelion did not look up for long. He did not look down either. His gaze rested naturally forward, not fixed on any single detail. This neutrality allowed the world to remain exactly as it was. Eventually, motion resumed. Not because the pause ended, but because motion and pause had merged into the same experience. Aelion walked on, carrying the same quiet presence, leaving behind no trace of where he had been. The night remained open, wide enough to hold every drifting thought and gentle enough to let them fade whenever they were ready. The night had reached a point where it no longer felt like night in the usual sense. It had become a wide, neutral space where awareness rested without needing to focus. Aelion continued to exist within this space, his movements slow enough that it blended completely with stillness. There was no clear beginning to his steps and no noticeable end to them. Motion happened gently, without purpose, without direction, and without the expectation of arrival. The environment around him remained unchanged, but even that fact no longer seemed important. The ground felt neither firm nor soft in any noticeable way. The air held no temperature worth naming. Everything existed in a balanced state that required no adjustment. Aelion's presence did not alter this balance. He simply moved within it, allowing the sameness to remain uninterrupted. Somewhere far away, the boundary between thought and rest continued to dissolve. Ideas no longer formed complete shapes. They appeared briefly and then faded before gaining weight. Breathing continued in a slow, steady rhythm, each breath following the last with quiet reliability. The body no longer shifted. It no longer searched for comfort. Comfort had already been found without effort. Aelion paused once more, though the pause was barely distinguishable from the movement that came before it. Time filled itself without markers, spreading evenly in all directions. There was no sense of waiting, no sense of anticipation. Awareness drifted freely, unattached to any single sensation. The silence remained consistent, neither deepening nor breaking, simply continuing as it had for a long while. The sky above remained dark, but even darkness had softened into something neutral. Stars existed without brightness, without distance, without meaning. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not observe them closely. Observation required intention, and intention was no longer present. His awareness stayed open and unfocused, resting gently within the quiet. Movement resumed naturally, without decision. Aelion continued forward, though forward had lost its significance. Each step mirrored the last, creating a rhythm that asked nothing of the listener, nothing of the night. The world remained open, calm, and undisturbed, allowing sleep to deepen wherever it had already begun to settle. By now, the night no longer suggested progression. It felt complete in every direction, as though it had settled into a state that did not require continuation or change. Aelion remained within this space without distinguishing himself from it. His presence had grown so quiet that it no longer felt separate from the stillness around him. Movement and rest had blended into a single, gentle condition that carried no definition. The ground beneath him existed without texture that demanded notice. It supported without resistance, offering no sensation strong enough to draw attention. The air remained evenly distributed, neither pressing nor lifting. Everything held itself in place naturally, without effort. Aelion moved within this balance without altering it, allowing the sameness to remain uninterrupted for as long as it wished. Far away, awareness had softened almost completely. Thoughts no longer assembled into sequences. They appeared briefly, lightly, and then faded without direction. There was no urge to follow them. Breathing continued at a slow, even pace, deep and unforced. Each breath flowed into the next, creating a quiet rhythm that required no attention. The body remained still, not because it had chosen stillness, but because stillness had become natural. Aelion paused again, though even the idea of pausing had lost its shape. Time passed without dividing itself into moments. It spread gently, evenly, without edges. There was no sense of waiting and no sense of arrival. Awareness rested in a wide, open state, unattached and calm. Silence continued without deepening, smooth and consistent, holding everything without effort. The sky remained dark, though darkness itself no longer felt distinct. Stars existed as distant presences without brightness or meaning. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not engage with them. Engagement was unnecessary. His awareness remained soft and open, drifting without anchoring to any detail. Eventually, movement continued, though it was impossible to say when it had stopped or started again. Aelion moved forward without direction, without intention, without memory. Each step resembled the last so closely that repetition itself dissolved into background quiet. The night remained wide and undisturbed, offering nothing to solve, nothing to follow, and nothing to complete, allowing sleep to deepen wherever it had already taken hold. The night no longer felt like something that could be measured or compared. It existed as a steady presence, wide and calm, holding everything without asking anything in return. Aelion remained within this quiet expanse, not separate from it, not distinct from the stillness that surrounded him. His movement, if it could still be called movement, blended so completely with rest that the difference between the two no longer mattered. Everything continued without effort, without intention, without awareness of continuation itself. The ground beneath him offered support without sensation. It neither invited attention nor resisted his presence. The air remained evenly balanced, carrying no temperature strong enough to notice. There were no contrasts left to observe, no changes worth tracking. Aelion existed within this uniform space the way silence exists between breaths, steady and unobtrusive, always present but rarely examined. Far away, awareness had loosened almost entirely. Thoughts no longer formed words. They appeared as brief impressions and faded before they could be recognized. There was no desire to follow them and no reason to let them go. Breathing continued on its own, slow and even, each breath arriving and leaving without interruption. The body remained still, resting not because it had decided to rest, but because rest had become its natural state. Time continued without dividing itself into moments. There were no beginnings or endings to notice, no transitions to follow. Everything flowed gently, evenly, without direction. Aelion paused, though pausing had long since lost its meaning. The quiet remained smooth and consistent, filling the space completely without growing heavier or lighter. Awareness rested softly, unattached to any detail, drifting without destination. The sky remained dark, though darkness itself had softened into something neutral and familiar. Stars existed without brightness or distance, present but insignificant. They offered no guidance and required no attention. Aelion did not look toward them for long. Looking implied focus, and focus was no longer necessary. His awareness remained open and unfixed, resting comfortably within the sameness of the night. Movement continued, though it was impossible to say when it had resumed. Aelion remained present, step after identical step, each moment resembling the last so closely that repetition itself dissolved into quiet background calm. The night remained open and undisturbed, offering nothing to solve, nothing to complete, and nothing to remember, allowing sleep to remain deep wherever it had already settled. The night remained exactly as it had been, without presenting any reason to be noticed. Nothing suggested that time had moved forward, and nothing suggested that it had stopped. Aelion existed within this steady quiet as he always had, neither arriving nor leaving, simply remaining present where presence required no effort. His awareness stayed wide and unfocused, allowing everything to be as it was without interpretation. The ground beneath him felt the same as it always did, offering support without sensation. There was no texture worth describing, no detail that invited attention. The air rested evenly around him, unchanged and unremarkable. There were no sounds gathering in the distance and no silence deepening nearby. Everything stayed evenly distributed, calm and undemanding. Aelion continued moving, though movement itself had become indistinguishable from stillness. Each step mirrored the one before it so closely that difference no longer existed. Forward and backward held no meaning here. Direction had softened into neutrality, and progress had dissolved into repetition. This repetition did not ask to be followed. It simply existed, steady and familiar. Far away, awareness drifted without forming shape. Thoughts no longer appeared as ideas, only as faint impressions that faded before recognition. There was no effort required to release them. Breathing continued on its own, slow and balanced, each breath flowing into the next without interruption. The body remained relaxed, settled into a position that felt natural without needing adjustment. Aelion paused, though the pause did not interrupt anything. Time continued to fill itself quietly, spreading evenly without edges or markers. There was no waiting, no anticipation, and no sense of completion. Awareness rested gently within this open space, unattached and calm, allowing the quiet to remain uninterrupted. The sky stayed dark in a way that no longer suggested night or day. Stars remained present without brightness, without distance, without meaning. They offered nothing to consider and required nothing in return. Aelion did not focus on them. Focus had become unnecessary. His awareness remained soft, open, and unanchored. Movement continued naturally, without decision. Aelion remained within the same gentle rhythm, step after identical step, moment after identical moment. The night held everything without change, without intention, and without conclusion, allowing rest to remain deep and undisturbed wherever it had already taken hold. The quiet remained exactly as it had been, without shifting or signaling any change. It no longer suggested that something was continuing, only that everything simply was. Aelion remained present within this steady state, not separate from the stillness around him, not defined by movement or rest. His existence blended so completely with the surrounding calm that it became impossible to distinguish where awareness ended and where the night began. The ground beneath him continued to support without sensation. It offered no texture strong enough to notice, no resistance, no invitation to pay attention. The air remained evenly balanced, neither warm nor cool in a way that mattered. Nothing contrasted with anything else. Differences had softened into sameness, and sameness required no observation. Aelion moved, though the idea of movement had become abstract. Each step followed the last without distinction, without direction, without any suggestion of progress. Forward felt no different from remaining still. Time no longer formed sequences. It spread gently, evenly, without edges, filling the space without announcing itself. Far away, awareness rested in a softened state. Thoughts did not assemble into language or images. They appeared only as faint impressions and dissolved before recognition. There was no effort involved in letting them go. Breathing continued slowly and steadily, each breath arriving and leaving without interruption, without urgency. The body remained settled, not searching for comfort, not adjusting, simply resting as it was. Aelion paused, though pausing had long since lost its distinction. The quiet continued uninterrupted, smooth and consistent, neither deepening nor lifting. There was no sense of waiting and no sense of arrival. Awareness drifted freely within this open space, unattached to any single sensation, content to remain unfocused. The sky remained dark in a way that no longer suggested time or distance. Stars existed as distant presences without brightness or meaning. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not observe them closely. Observation required intention, and intention was no longer present. His awareness stayed wide and soft, resting comfortably within the sameness of the night. Movement continued naturally, without decision or awareness of continuation. Aelion remained within the same gentle rhythm, each moment resembling the last so closely that repetition itself faded into background calm. The night held everything without change, without expectation, and without conclusion, allowing rest to remain deep and undisturbed wherever it had already settled. The night no longer suggested itself as night. It existed as a steady condition, wide and calm, without edges or transitions. Aelion remained within this condition without separating himself from it. There was no sense of arrival and no sense of departure. Presence existed gently, without needing to be noticed, without needing to be sustained. The ground beneath him continued to offer support without sensation. It did not feel firm or soft in a way that mattered. It simply existed, carrying weight without resistance. The air rested evenly around him, unchanged and unremarkable. There were no shifts in temperature worth recognizing and no movement worth following. Everything held its place naturally, without effort. Movement continued, though the idea of moving had become almost symbolic. Each step resembled the last so closely that distinction disappeared. Forward and stillness blended into the same experience. Time no longer moved from one moment to the next. It spread evenly, quietly, filling the space without forming structure. There was no sequence to follow and no moment to remember. Far away, awareness rested in a softened state. Thoughts did not form language. They did not create images. They appeared briefly as impressions and faded before recognition. There was no effort involved in letting them dissolve. Breathing continued slowly and steadily, each breath following the last with gentle reliability. The body remained still, settled without adjustment, resting without intention. Aelion paused, though pausing no longer interrupted anything. The quiet continued smoothly, unbroken and consistent. There was no waiting and no expectation. Awareness drifted freely within this open space, unattached and calm. Silence did not deepen or lift. It simply remained, holding everything without demand. The sky existed without suggestion of distance or direction. Darkness no longer felt heavy or light. Stars remained present as distant points without brightness or meaning. They did not guide and did not distract. Aelion did not observe them closely. Observation required focus, and focus was no longer present. Awareness stayed open, soft, and unfixed. Movement continued without decision. Aelion remained within the same gentle rhythm, moment following identical moment. Repetition no longer felt repetitive. It dissolved into background calm. The night held everything without change, without intention, and without conclusion, allowing rest to remain deep and undisturbed wherever it had already settled. The quiet continued without changing its nature. It did not deepen, and it did not fade. It simply remained, steady and open, holding everything without distinction. Aelion existed within this quiet without separating himself from it. Presence no longer felt like something that could be identified. It was simply there, gentle and unremarkable, like the space between one breath and the next. The ground beneath him continued to support without sensation. It offered no signal that it was being touched. There was no texture strong enough to notice, no resistance to acknowledge. The air rested evenly around him, unchanged and calm. Temperature no longer suggested warmth or coolness. Everything existed in balance, without contrast and without demand. Movement continued, though the idea of movement had almost completely dissolved. Each step resembled the last so closely that distinction no longer existed. Forward had no meaning. Remaining still had no meaning either. Time did not progress from one moment to another. It spread evenly, quietly, filling the space without forming direction or sequence. Far away, awareness rested in a softened state. Thoughts did not form shapes. They did not become words. They appeared briefly as faint impressions and then faded without recognition. There was no effort involved in letting them go. Breathing continued on its own, slow and even, each breath following the last without interruption. The body remained still, settled naturally, without searching for comfort or change. Aelion paused, though pausing did not interrupt anything. The quiet continued smoothly, without edges or breaks. There was no sense of waiting and no sense of arrival. Awareness drifted freely within this open space, unattached and calm. Silence did not grow heavier or lighter. It remained consistent, gentle, and complete. The sky existed without suggesting distance, direction, or time. Darkness no longer felt separate from light. Stars remained present as distant points without brightness or meaning. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not observe them closely. Observation required intention, and intention had long since softened into neutrality. Awareness stayed wide, open, and unfixed. Movement continued without decision. Aelion remained within the same gentle rhythm, moment following identical moment. Repetition no longer registered as repetition. It blended fully into background calm. The quiet held everything without change, without expectation, and without conclusion, allowing rest to remain deep and undisturbed wherever it had already settled. The stillness remained, unchanged and untroubled, as if it had always been waiting in the same place. Aelion did not arrive here, because arriving would have suggested distance. He simply found himself within the same calm that had surrounded him before, familiar without being remembered. The quiet did not reset or renew itself. It continued gently, exactly as it had been, without acknowledging that anything had passed. The ground beneath him felt as it always had, steady and unnoticed. There was no difference between this moment and the one before it, or the one that would follow. Support existed without sensation. The air rested evenly, carrying no signal that time had moved forward. Nothing indicated a change. Nothing needed to. Movement continued in the same softened way. Each step resembled the last so closely that repetition faded into background calm. Direction held no meaning. Forward did not suggest progress, and stillness did not suggest pause. Time spread evenly once more, quietly filling the space without forming moments that could be counted or recalled. Far away, awareness remained loose and unfixed. Thoughts did not return to form. They drifted briefly as impressions and dissolved before recognition, just as they had before. Breathing continued slowly and evenly, reliable and unforced. The body stayed settled, resting without effort, as though it had never needed to search for rest at all. Aelion paused, though pausing did not interrupt the flow. The quiet remained smooth and complete, neither deepening nor lifting. There was no sense of continuation and no sense of ending. Awareness rested gently, wide and open, unattached to any detail. Silence held everything evenly, without demand. The sky remained dark in the same neutral way, offering no sense of distance or direction. Stars existed without brightness or meaning, present but insignificant. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not observe them closely. Observation required focus, and focus was no longer necessary. Awareness stayed open, soft, and unfixed. And so the quiet continued, exactly as it had before, without signaling that it had ever changed. Aelion remained within it, moving and resting in the same gentle rhythm, allowing the stillness to remain complete, undisturbed, and ready to continue again in exactly the same way. The quiet did not return, because it had never gone anywhere. It remained steady and complete, holding the space in the same gentle way it always had. Aelion continued within this stillness without recognizing a beginning or an end. Presence did not need to be renewed. It simply existed, resting comfortably in the sameness of the moment. The ground beneath him felt unchanged, offering support without sensation. There was no reason to notice it and no reason not to. It remained exactly as it had been before, steady and unnoticed. The air rested evenly, neither shifting nor settling, carrying no signal that time had passed. Everything stayed balanced, allowing awareness to remain wide and unfocused. Movement continued in the softened way it always had. Each step followed the last without distinction, blending into a rhythm that no longer registered as movement at all. Forward and stillness remained indistinguishable. Time did not gather itself into moments. It spread gently, evenly, filling the quiet without forming edges or transitions. Far away, awareness remained loose and calm. Thoughts did not assemble into anything recognizable. They drifted briefly as impressions and faded without effort. Breathing continued slowly and evenly, each breath flowing into the next with quiet reliability. The body remained settled, resting without adjustment, as though it had always been this way. Aelion paused, though pausing did not interrupt anything. The stillness remained smooth and uninterrupted. There was no waiting and no arrival. Awareness rested gently, unattached to any detail, allowing the quiet to remain complete. Silence did not deepen or fade. It simply continued. The sky existed without suggesting distance or direction. Darkness no longer contrasted with light. Stars remained present without brightness or meaning. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not observe them closely. Observation required intention, and intention was no longer present. Awareness stayed open and soft. And so the quiet continued, unchanged and undisturbed, allowing everything to remain exactly as it was. Aelion remained within it, moving and resting in the same gentle rhythm, ready to continue again without notice, without signal, and without conclusion. Nothing indicated that anything new had begun. The quiet remained exactly as it was, steady and undemanding, filling the space without drawing attention to itself. Aelion remained within this calm without recognizing a boundary around it. There was no sense of entering or leaving. Presence existed softly, without form, without weight, and without the need to be noticed. The ground beneath him continued to support without sensation. It did not feel closer or farther than before. It simply remained where it had always been, steady and neutral. The air rested evenly around him, unchanged and still. There was no movement that suggested direction and no stillness that suggested pause. Everything remained balanced, allowing awareness to stay open and unfocused. Movement continued in the same softened manner. Each step followed the last without distinction, blending into a rhythm that no longer registered as motion. Forward held no meaning. Remaining still held no meaning either. Time did not separate itself into moments. It spread gently, evenly, filling the quiet without forming structure. Far away, awareness remained loose and calm. Thoughts did not gather or return. They appeared briefly as faint impressions and dissolved before recognition. There was no effort involved in letting them fade. Breathing continued slowly and evenly, each breath flowing into the next without interruption. The body remained settled, resting without adjustment, as though rest had always been present. Aelion paused, though pausing did not interrupt the flow of the quiet. The stillness remained smooth and consistent. There was no waiting and no sense of completion. Awareness rested gently within this open space, unattached to any single sensation. Silence did not deepen or lift. It simply continued, holding everything evenly. The sky existed without suggesting height, distance, or direction. Darkness no longer contrasted with anything else. Stars remained present without brightness or meaning. They neither guided nor distracted. Aelion did not focus on them. Focus required intention, and intention had long since softened into neutrality. Awareness stayed wide, open, and calm. And so the quiet continued, exactly as it had before, without signaling change. Aelion remained within it, moving and resting in the same gentle rhythm, allowing the stillness to remain complete and ready to continue again in exactly the same way. For the first time in a long while, something shifted, not enough to demand attention, but enough to exist. The quiet did not break, yet it no longer felt perfectly uniform. Aelion continued forward, and as he did, the ground beneath him changed slightly in texture, not becoming rough or soft, only different enough to be noticed if one were paying close attention. He did not stop. Change did not require reaction. The air carried a faint variation, a suggestion rather than a presence. It moved slowly, gently, as if reminding the world that motion was still possible. Aelion sensed this without curiosity. He had moved through many states like this before, places where sameness slowly gave way to subtle distinction. These transitions were never dramatic. They unfolded gradually, over stretches of time that felt almost identical from beginning to end. As he walked, the space around him expanded. Not outward in any visible direction, but inward, creating a feeling of openness that had not been there before. The night remained dark, yet the darkness no longer felt completely neutral. It carried a quiet depth, as though layers existed beyond immediate perception. Aelion did not explore them. Awareness alone was enough. Some were distant, rest deepened further. Breathing remained slow, but now carried a slightly different rhythm, as if the body had settled into a deeper level of ease. Thoughts were no longer drifting impressions. They had thinned even more, fading before forming anything recognizable. Sleep was no longer approaching. It had already arrived and was continuing on its own. Aelion paused briefly, not because he needed to, but because the moment allowed for it. The ground held him steadily. The air remained calm. The pause felt different from previous ones, less suspended and more grounded. Time passed quietly, but it passed forward now, rather than spreading outward without direction. When he resumed walking, the path ahead felt longer. Not challenging. Not uncertain. Simply longer. The night no longer felt endless. It felt extended, unfolding slowly, revealing small, unremarkable variations that did not ask to be followed but confirmed that movement still mattered. Aelion continued on, aware that the quiet was changing shape around him. It remained gentle. It remained calm. But it was no longer repeating itself. It was becoming something else, one subtle moment at a time. The path did not become clearer as Aelion continued forward. It did not reveal edges or markings. It simply existed as a direction implied by movement itself. Each step carried him onward without effort, and the space around him adjusted slowly, as though it had been expecting him to move this way all along. Nothing resisted. Nothing guided. The ground beneath his feet felt slightly firmer now, not enough to feel solid, but enough to suggest stability. It no longer dissolved into neutrality. It held its shape quietly, offering support without comment. The sensation did not invite attention. It existed only to be accepted, and acceptance came naturally. The air began to feel deeper. Not heavier, not warmer, only more present. It moved in slow, even layers, brushing past without sound. Breathing aligned with it effortlessly, each inhale and exhale stretching gently into the next. The body settled further, sinking into a state where effort no longer reached the surface of awareness. As Aelion walked, faint shapes appeared at the edges of perception. They were not objects, not landmarks, only variations in darkness that suggested form without defining it. They remained distant and unimportant. He did not turn toward them. The path ahead continued to be enough. Time passed in a way that could be felt but not measured. Moments followed one another without contrast. There was no anticipation and no memory forming behind him. Each step replaced the last completely, leaving nothing behind that needed to be carried forward. At one point, the path widened. The space around him opened gently, allowing more quiet to exist at once. The sky above remained dark, but it felt farther away now, as though the world had stretched slightly. Stars were fewer, dimmer, and less distinct. They no longer suggested anything beyond their presence. Aelion slowed, not because he was tired, but because the forward motion had softened. Movement became optional rather than continuous. He remained standing, then sitting, then simply resting within the space the path had brought him to. The ground accepted this without change. The quiet here felt different. Not repetitive. Not empty. It felt settled, as if it had been waiting for this exact pace. Awareness drifted lower, deeper, no longer observing the surroundings but merging with them. The path no longer mattered. It had already done what it needed to do. Aelion remained there, breathing evenly, allowing time to continue its slow movement forward. Whatever lay ahead did not approach quickly. It did not announce itself. It would arrive only when it was ready, and until then, the night remained calm, wide, and undemanding. The space where Aelion rested did not define itself as a destination. It did not feel like arrival. It felt more like a natural slowing, a place where movement gradually lost its urgency and settled into stillness. The ground remained firm enough to support him, yet soft enough to disappear from attention. Nothing pressed upward. Nothing pulled downward. The air here felt older, as though it had been resting for a long time without interruption. It carried no scent and no temperature worth noticing. It moved only when breathing passed through it, and even then, the motion was gentle and brief. Each breath seemed to sink rather than rise, guiding awareness deeper into rest. Aelion remained where he was, not watching the space, not listening for change. The darkness around him no longer felt wide. It felt close and contained, like a quiet room without walls. There were no edges to trace and no center to stand within. The place held itself evenly, requiring nothing from those who passed through it. Time continued forward, but it did so quietly. It no longer stretched or repeated. It moved like a slow current beneath still water, unseen but present. Aelion did not count it. Counting would have required effort, and effort no longer had a place here. Moments passed without being marked. Somewhere nearby, the space shifted slightly. Not enough to suggest danger or interest, only enough to confirm that the world had not stopped entirely. The darkness adjusted its depth. The air settled again. Aelion remained calm, unaffected by the change, allowing it to exist without meaning. Gradually, the sense of the path faded completely. There was no forward direction to return to and no reason to look back. The journey had narrowed into this quiet pause, and the pause felt sufficient. Rest was no longer something he was entering. It was something already happening. His posture softened further. Muscles released without instruction. The body aligned naturally with the ground, supported evenly, held without pressure. Breathing slowed just slightly more, finding a rhythm that required no awareness to maintain. Sleep did not approach. It continued. In this place, thoughts did not form stories. They did not drift or return. They remained absent, leaving awareness smooth and uninterrupted. The quiet was no longer something surrounding Aelion. It was something he was within, fully and without separation. Time continued to move, slowly and steadily, carrying the night forward without sound. Whatever change might come next remained distant and unannounced. For now, the space remained calm, settled, and open, allowing rest to deepen naturally as the journey continued without hurry. After a long stretch of quiet, the space ahead changed almost imperceptibly. It did not announce itself as a structure at first. It appeared as a subtle difference in density, a place where the darkness seemed slightly more settled. Aelion sensed it rather than saw it, and that was enough to continue forward without curiosity. As he moved closer, the ground beneath him became more even. Each step felt quieter than the last, as though sound itself had thinned and drifted away. The air remained calm, carrying no echo and no resistance. Breathing stayed slow and steady, unremarkable in its consistency. The structure revealed itself gradually. Not through shape or height, but through presence. It felt ancient without suggesting age. It had not been built recently, yet it did not feel worn. Time had passed through it without leaving marks. The space around it rested more deeply, as if the world had chosen this place to slow down further. Aelion approached without intention. There was no entrance to search for and no threshold to cross. The structure did not invite or refuse. It simply existed. As he neared it, awareness softened again, settling lower, quieter. The sense of movement became secondary, almost optional. Inside, the darkness felt smoother. Not deeper, just more even. The ground here was level and stable, offering a sense of balance without drawing attention. There were no walls to trace with the eyes and no ceiling to look toward. The space held itself gently, without edges that needed to be understood. Time continued its slow passage. The structure did not change as moments passed through it. It did not react to presence. It remained steady and indifferent, allowing rest to settle more completely. Aelion remained still, not because he had chosen to stop, but because movement no longer felt necessary. Breathing aligned with the quiet here. Each breath felt slightly longer, slightly deeper, without effort. The body relaxed further, supported evenly by the ground and the air. Awareness no longer wandered. It rested where it was, content to remain unfocused. There were no symbols to interpret and no stories held within the structure. Whatever purpose it once had no longer mattered. It existed now only as a place where time slowed naturally, where stillness gathered without being forced. Aelion remained within the structure as the night continued forward. Change did not arrive quickly. It did not announce itself. For now, the quiet held, steady and complete. Allowing the journey to continue without urgency or destination, within the still structure, the space gradually shifted inward. It did not narrow or darken, but it became more contained, as though the quiet had chosen a smaller area to rest more deeply. Aelion moved without deciding to move, guided by nothing more than the gentle allowance of the space itself. Each step felt softer than the last, absorbed completely by the ground. The inner chamber did not reveal itself as a room. It had no shape that could be remembered and no boundaries that could be measured. It felt separate only in the way silence can feel separate from noise, though there had been no noise before. The air here rested lower, thicker with stillness, carrying no movement of its own. Aelion remained near the center, though the idea of a center did not hold much meaning. The ground supported him evenly, neither cold nor warm. It did not reflect sound or sensation. It existed only to hold. Breathing continued slowly, each inhale and exhale smoothing awareness further, easing it into rest. Time moved forward in a subdued way. It no longer felt like a current or a sequence. It felt like a gentle settling, as though moments were being placed carefully one after another without urgency. Nothing marked their passing. Nothing collected them. The darkness in the chamber was consistent and calm. It did not shift with presence. It did not respond. There were no shadows to follow and no points of focus to drift toward. Vision softened naturally, releasing the need to define anything. Aelion's thoughts did not return. There were no impressions drifting at the edges of awareness now. The mind rested as fully as the body, suspended in a state that required no maintenance. Rest deepened without being encouraged. Somewhere far beyond the structure, the world continued its quiet movement. Here, within the chamber, that movement felt distant and unimportant. The chamber existed apart from change, not resisting it, simply allowing it to pass by without entering. Aelion remained there as the night continued forward. Nothing asked him to leave. Nothing suggested that he should stay. The space did not hold him and did not release him. It simply existed, offering a place where time could move slowly and rest could remain undisturbed. Within the inner chamber, nothing changed at once. The space did not brighten or darken, and no sound emerged to mark the passage of time. Instead, awareness itself began to settle differently, as though it had found a deeper place to rest. Aelion remained still, not because he chose to, but because movement no longer felt relevant. The ground beneath him continued to offer even support. It did not press upward or pull downward. It held gently, without drawing attention to itself. The air remained calm and neutral, resting evenly against the skin. Each breath moved slowly, almost unnoticed, carrying the body further into ease. Time continued forward in a softened way. It no longer felt like a sequence of moments. It felt like a gradual sinking, a slow descent into stillness. Nothing marked the transition from one moment to the next. Awareness drifted lower, releasing the need to follow anything at all. The chamber remained unchanged. It did not respond to presence or absence. It existed as it always had, steady and indifferent. Darkness stayed smooth and uniform, offering no contrast to focus on. Vision remained unfixed, allowing the mind to rest without forming images. Aelion's sense of self softened. It did not disappear, but it became less defined. Boundaries faded gently, without resistance. There was no effort involved in letting go of distinction. It happened naturally, as rest deepened on its own. Breathing slowed just slightly more, finding a rhythm that required no awareness to maintain. The body remained relaxed and supported, aligned naturally with the space around it. Muscles stayed loose, free of tension. Sleep continued, steady and uninterrupted. Outside the structure, time continued its quiet movement. Inside the chamber, that movement felt distant and unimportant. The chamber existed as a place where change passed by without entering, where stillness remained complete. Aelion remained within this quiet state as the night moved forward. Nothing asked for attention. Nothing suggested urgency. The journey did not end, but it did not advance quickly either. It continued in this calm, unhurried way, allowing rest to remain deep and undisturbed. After a long period of stillness, motion returned in the quietest possible way. It did not begin with a decision or a thought. It began as a gentle adjustment, a subtle shift in balance that allowed Aelion to rise without effort. The chamber did not react. It remained calm, unchanged, as if movement had always been an option it did not need to acknowledge. As he stood, the ground continued to support him evenly. There was no resistance and no encouragement. The air felt the same as before, calm and neutral, resting lightly around him. Breathing remained slow and steady, carrying no urgency. Nothing suggested that time had moved forward, yet movement itself confirmed that it had. Aelion took a step, then another. Each one felt quiet and unremarkable. The chamber did not reveal a path, but space opened gently ahead of him, allowing progress without direction. Darkness remained smooth and consistent, offering no landmarks and no sense of distance. With each step, awareness remained low and relaxed. Thoughts did not return. Memory did not form. The body moved on its own, guided by balance rather than intention. The rhythm of walking settled naturally, slow and even, without variation. Gradually, the sense of enclosure softened. The chamber did not end abruptly. It loosened, allowing space to widen without forming a clear boundary. The air felt slightly more open, though still calm. The quiet remained complete, but it no longer felt contained. Time continued forward at the same unhurried pace. There was no anticipation of what lay ahead and no reflection on what had passed. Each moment replaced the last completely, leaving nothing behind that needed to be carried. Aelion continued walking as the structure gave way to open darkness once more. The night outside felt familiar, though subtly changed. It held more depth now, more room for rest to continue without interruption. The journey did not become clearer. It did not demand attention. It simply went on, step by step, through calm space and quiet time, allowing sleep to remain deep and undisturbed as the night slowly unfolded, the open night welcomed Aelion without ceremony. It did not feel vast or empty, only quietly present, stretching gently in all directions without drawing attention to itself. The ground beneath him remained even and reliable, neither soft nor firm, simply there to support each slow step forward. The air outside the structure felt slightly cooler, though the difference was mild and easy to accept. It moved in long, slow currents that brushed past without sound. Breathing aligned with it naturally, deep and steady, as if the body had learned this rhythm long ago and never forgotten it. As Aelion continued walking, the darkness around him carried subtle variations. The night was not uniform here. It held faint layers, gentle shifts in depth that suggested open space rather than enclosure. There were no shapes demanding recognition, only a sense of distance that did not need to be measured. Time moved forward quietly. It did not rush or pause. It passed in the same slow, even way, carrying the night with it. Each moment felt complete on its own, leaving no trace as it faded. There was nothing to anticipate and nothing to recall. The ground gradually changed beneath his feet. It felt slightly uneven now, though not enough to require attention. Each step adjusted without thought, guided by balance rather than intention. The body remained relaxed, moving smoothly through the darkness. Far above, the sky felt higher than before. Stars were present, though fewer and dimmer, scattered thinly across the night. They did not form patterns or offer direction. They existed quietly, distant and unimportant. Aelion slowed again, not because of fatigue, but because the pace of the night allowed it. Movement softened into a gentle drift forward. Awareness remained low and calm, resting comfortably within the body. The open night continued to unfold around him, unhurried and undemanding. Whatever lay ahead remained distant and quiet, arriving only as slowly as the night itself chose to move. The land gradually opened into a wide, gentle plain. It did not announce the change with elevation or color. It simply felt broader, as though the night had taken a slow breath and decided not to release it yet. Aelion continued forward, his step steady and quiet, leaving no impression behind him. The ground here felt dry and even, carrying a faint sense of firmness that made balance effortless. Each step landed softly, absorbed by the earth without sound. There were no stones to avoid and no paths to follow. The plain did not guide movement. It allowed it. The air moved lazily across the open space, slow enough to be barely noticeable. It carried no scent and no chill worth acknowledging. Breathing remained deep and even, settling into a rhythm that felt self-sustaining. The body no longer adjusted. It simply moved. Time passed in long, unbroken stretches. Nothing marked its movement except the continuation of walking. Moments did not collect into memory. They passed through awareness and dissolved, leaving the mind smooth and clear behind them. Far in the distance, the darkness shifted slightly, suggesting low hills or gentle rises in the land. They did not invite approach and did not create curiosity. They remained distant, quiet, and unimportant. The open plain itself was enough. The sky above felt wide and distant. Stars appeared thin and scattered, their light muted and soft. They did not shimmer or move. They remained fixed, offering no sense of direction or story. The night did not require interpretation. Aelion slowed once more as the openness of the plain settled around him. Movement became lighter, less defined, as though walking itself was becoming optional. Awareness rested comfortably within the body, no longer observing the surroundings, no longer following the passage of time. The plain remained calm and unchanged as the night continued forward. Nothing approached quickly. Nothing faded suddenly. The journey carried on at its own quiet pace, allowing rest to remain deep as the open land stretched gently into the distance. As Aelion crossed the plain, the land began to rise almost without notice. It was not a hill in the usual sense, only a gradual change in elevation that revealed itself through balance rather than sight. His steps adjusted naturally, slowing just enough to remain smooth and effortless. The night did not react. It continued to rest quietly over the land. The ground felt slightly firmer here, carrying a subtle texture that remained gentle and unobtrusive. Each step settled easily, supported without resistance. There were no sharp edges beneath him, no sudden changes that demanded attention. The land allowed movement in the same calm way it had allowed stillness before. The air shifted very slightly as elevation increased. It felt a touch cooler, though the difference was mild and unimportant. Breathing remained slow and even, aligning naturally with the steady rhythm of walking. Awareness stayed low and relaxed, unconcerned with surroundings or direction. Time passed quietly as the land continued its gradual rise. The open plain behind him faded without memory. Ahead, the night remained open and undefined, offering no landmark and no destination. The journey continued simply because movement had not yet stopped. At the top of the low rise, the ground leveled again. The change was so gentle that it felt less like reaching a point and more like settling into another stretch of calm. Aelion slowed naturally, allowing the stillness of the place to take shape around him. From here, the land extended outward once more, smooth and quiet. The sky felt slightly closer, though no stars moved or changed. darkness remained soft and even, holding the space without pressure. The night did not deepen or lift. It remained consistent and calm. Aelion stood for a while, breathing evenly, feeling the steadiness of the ground beneath him. There was no reason to continue and no reason to stop. Both felt equally acceptable. The moment held itself without asking to be defined. Eventually, movement resumed, not as a decision but as a continuation. Each step carried him forward across the gentle rise and back into open land, where the night stretched on, quiet and patient, allowing time to pass as slowly as it wished. Beyond the gentle rise, the land opened again into a broad and quiet stretch. It did not feel new or unfamiliar. It felt like a continuation that had been waiting patiently. Aelion moved forward at the same unhurried pace, his steps light and evenly spaced, leaving no trace behind him. The ground here felt smoother, almost level enough to forget. Each step landed softly and passed without sound. There was no need to adjust balance or direction. Movement flowed on its own, steady and calm, guided by nothing more than the natural rhythm of walking. The air rested evenly across the open space. It carried a faint coolness that remained constant, neither increasing nor fading. Breathing stayed slow and deep, the body settling further into a state where effort no longer reached awareness. Each breath followed the last without pause or intention. Time continued to move forward, though it left no clear mark as it passed. Moments did not stand apart from one another. They blended smoothly, creating a sense of continuity that required no attention. Nothing felt delayed. Nothing felt rushed. Far ahead, the darkness held subtle variations, gentle shifts that suggested open distance rather than form. There were no shapes to approach and no boundaries to reach. The land did not promise anything beyond itself. It simply extended quietly into the night. The sky above remained wide and distant. Stars appeared faint and scattered, their presence subdued and steady. They did not flicker or guide. They remained where they were, unimportant and calm, allowing the night to remain undisturbed. Aelion slowed again, not because the land demanded it, but because the openness allowed rest to deepen further. Walking became lighter, almost effortless, as though the body could continue indefinitely without strain. Awareness stayed low and gentle, no longer following the surroundings. The wide expanse remained unchanged as the night carried on. Nothing approached suddenly. Nothing faded away. The journey continued in this quiet, unbroken way, allowing rest to remain deep as time passed softly across the open land. As Aelion moved across the wide expanse, the idea of distance slowly lost its meaning. The land no longer felt near or far. Each step carried him forward, yet nothing seemed closer than before. The knight accepted this without change, resting evenly over the ground and the open space around him. The surface beneath his feet remained smooth and reliable. It did not vary enough to require attention. Balance adjusted on its own, quietly and without thought. Walking became less like an action and more like a gentle continuation of being present within the night. The air remained calm, moving in long, slow patterns that were barely noticeable. It did not cool further or warm. It stayed constant, allowing breathing to remain slow and deep. Each breath settled naturally into the next, creating a steady rhythm that needed no guidance. Time passed without structure. It did not gather into moments that could be counted or remembered. Instead, it flowed evenly, like a wide and shallow current moving beneath the surface of awareness. Nothing marked its passage except the quiet continuation of motion. The darkness ahead felt no different from the darkness behind. There were no landmarks to separate one stretch of land from another. The plain extended in all directions with the same calm neutrality, offering no reason to change course or pace. Above, the sky remained distant and unchanged. Stars stayed faint and scattered, holding their positions without pattern. They did not brighten or fade. They existed quietly, detached from the slow movement below. Aelion's pace softened further. Steps became slower, lighter, as though walking itself was gradually dissolving into stillness. Awareness remained low and relaxed, resting comfortably within the body. There was no effort involved in continuing, and no effort required to stop. The night continued forward in this unbroken way. Distance no longer mattered. Direction no longer mattered. Only the steady presence of the quiet remained, allowing the journey to proceed slowly and gently as time passed without interruption. The night arrived without intention. No sound announced it. No moment marked its beginning. The world simply became quieter. Aelion was already awake. He always was. He did not wake up because sleep did not belong to him. He did not rest because rest was unnecessary. He stood where the ground felt firm and unchanged. The surface beneath him had not moved in a long time. It had no reason to. Aelion looked ahead. There was nothing demanding attention. The sky remained still. Stars stayed where they were expected to be. Nothing fell. Nothing shifted. This was acceptable. He began to walk. Not toward something. Not away from anything. His movement did not create sound. It did not disturb the air. It only allowed time to continue passing slowly. Each step felt identical to the one before it. There was no difference worth noting. Aelion preferred it that way. Somewhere far away, a thought was repeating itself inside a human mind. The thought was not important. It was not urgent. It simply refused to leave. Aelion sensed this repetition but did not react. Repetition was natural. It required no correction. He continued walking. The ground remained level. The temperature did not change. The night stayed consistent. Minutes passed without significance. Hours followed without effort. Nothing needed to happen. And so, nothing did, the night remained consistent. This was important, though no one noticed. Consistency allowed the world to relax. It removed the need for attention. Aelion continued forward. The path beneath him did not curve. It did not rise. It did not fall. It existed only as much as necessary. He had walked this same stretch before. Or something similar to it. The difference was not worth remembering. Aelion slowed his pace. Not because he was tired. Not because he had arrived. Slowing down was simply another way of moving. The air felt unchanged. Cool, but not cold. Still, but not heavy. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a body shifted slightly beneath a blanket. A shoulder relaxed. A breath deepened. These small adjustments mattered more than grand events. Aelion understood this. He paused again. Pauses were never interruptions. They were part of the movement. The ground beneath him held its shape. No cracks formed. No pressure remained. Time passed carefully. It did not rush. It did not hesitate. Aelion looked to his left. Nothing required description. To his right, the same absence of urgency remained. This balance was ideal. In earlier ages, if such a term could be used, others like Aelion existed. They did not meet. They did not gather. They simply performed similar tasks in separate quiet spaces. Most of them were forgotten. Aelion did not mind. Being remembered would have complicated things. He resumed walking. The repetition of steps formed a pattern. The pattern formed familiarity. Familiarity created calm. Somewhere, a thought finally loosened its grip. It did not disappear. It merely softened. Aelion felt the shift but did not acknowledge it. Acknowledgement was unnecessary. The night continued. Stars remained in place. No clouds gathered with intention. Everything stayed incomplete. And that was enough. The night remained unchanged for a long time, long enough that the idea of change no longer seemed necessary. Aelion moved through the same quiet landscape, his presence leaving no mark behind him. The ground did not respond to his steps, and the air did not resist his movement. Everything allowed him to pass without comment, as if the world itself had agreed that nothing new needed to occur. Time continued in a steady, unremarkable manner, not measured by clocks or signals, but by the steady rhythm of breath that existed somewhere far away, inside someone who had nearly forgotten they were awake. Aelion did not count his steps. Counting suggested progress, and progress suggested an end. Neither of those ideas applied here. Instead, he allowed each moment to resemble the one before it. The sky above him maintained its familiar darkness, not deepening, not lightening, simply remaining as it was. Stars held their positions without drifting, and the space between them stayed wide and empty. This emptiness was not lacking, it was complete in its simplicity. As he walked, the path subtly repeated itself. Stones appeared similar to stones he had already passed. The texture of the ground felt familiar, though familiarity itself was not important. Aelion's awareness extended outward without focusing on anything specific. He noticed without examining. He observed without evaluating. This way of moving through the night required no effort, and effort, after all, was something meant for other kinds of beings. Somewhere, a distant mind shifted again. Thoughts slowed, not because they had resolved themselves, but because they had grown tired of repeating. This softening did not announce itself. It happened quietly, the way sleep often begins. Aelion sensed the change the way one senses a temperature difference that is barely there. He did not turn toward it. He did not need to. His role was not to intervene, only to remain present while things gradually settled into their natural stillness. The night continued to stretch, wide and uninterrupted. There were no signs marking its passage, no events demanding recognition. Aelion paused once more, standing without tension, without anticipation. Pauses like this were indistinguishable from movement. They served the same purpose. They allowed the world to remain balanced, suspended between intention and rest. Nothing asked for his attention, and so his attention rested everywhere equally. The silence deepened, though it did not become heavier. It stayed gentle, consistent, and open, leaving room for sleep to arrive whenever it chose. Aelion remained where he was for a time that could not be defined, and then, without any clear reason, he began to move again, continuing along a path that had no destination and required no memory.
This is Sleep Whisper. I will gently guide you into sleep by telling boring stories in a calm, monotone voice. I wish you a good night and deep, restful dreams. Please follow the channel for more.